How's everyone doing? As was stated, I'm Nancy Douyon, and I'm so excited to be presenting this group today. So I'm actually going to start right away and have them each kind of talk a little bit about themselves and their role in this industry. So as was stated, I'm Nancy Douyon. I'm a user experience researcher at Google, and I'm just going to move on. And also, LTS, what's your name? What are you doing in this industry? And also, I'd love to hear how you define yourself as an ally. Let's get straight into it.
Sure. My name's Josh Krammes. I have been kind of a serial entrepreneur. Started my first company out of Detroit in 2001, came here in 2009, did a couple other startups. Had some success and joined SoftLayer, who was just acquired by IBM a couple years ago. I recently left to start Merger Tech, which is a M&A firm. So we help startups get acquired. Since I'd been through that, it's kind of a natural progression. I also do some investing myself, really early stage startups. And I would consider myself an ally because I don't really see that there's, based on my background, in order to get any success done, you have to go with the best talent regardless of anything else. And so I've always built my teams around the best people, not around anything else. So.
Awesome. Kaustav.
Hi, I'm Kaustav Mitra. I'm with Infosys Foundation USA. We're a very, very young organization, a 6-month-old grant-making foundation, and we actually target grants towards...
Can we turn up the mic?
Is this better?
I don't think the mic is on.
Mic's on, lights on.
Yeah, no, it's good.
There we go. Okay. So I'll start over again. I'm Kaustav Mitra. I'm with Infosys Foundation USA. We are a grant-making foundation targeting computer science education in underserved communities. We're all of 6 months old, but we've been in this fairly active for the past 6 months. We're one of the largest partners of Code.org. We also do a lot of work with Donors Choose, and we were really, really happy to see Susan Mernit from Act Hood here earlier. She was one of our first grantees. Terrific organization, by the way. Our specific charter really is to figure out what we can do to be part of the solution in really making computer science as an area of education and as a professional choice more accessible to everybody. And that's really the big problem that we're trying to figure out. So if you happen to be with a nonprofit organization in this space, would love to chat with you, by the way. We're always looking for funding opportunities. To answer your second question, Nancy, this was a tough one for me. I wouldn't actually characterize myself as an ally in the context, perhaps, in which you meant it, because when I think about what each of us should be doing to really to bring more diversity into the workplace, into our own teams, into our organizations, and making sure that we are each responsible for creating a hospitable workplace and an inviting one which allows each person to achieve their potential regardless of their ethnicity, of their background, or any other factor we might choose. I call it being a decent human being. So I think it's not that anyone stakes a particular claim to being an ally. I really do believe that this is something that each and every one of us should be doing as part of our day-to-day work.
All right, I'm Parker Thompson. I'm here representing 500 Startups, which is an organization that has a big focus on diversity. We do early stage investing, so hopefully we are your first stop when you're looking to build a startup and looking for investors to work with. In terms of how I think about being an ally, I think about it very similar. I mean, as I think about diversity, I think that the data is very clear. I look a lot at the data and say, okay, we're not there yet. And then I look at the data on teams that do better. They tend to be more diverse. And then more anecdotally, but very interesting, I look at the investing that we've done and the investing that I've done specifically, and see that diverse teams actually do in practice outperform. So I think it's good business, and also it's just the right thing to do. This is the kind of world we want to live in. So you can characterize that as being allied, if you want to think about it that way.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. So my name is Loeb. I head up corporate development at Techstars. Thank you. For those of you who don't know us, we run 18 mentorship-driven accelerators across the world in 13 different locations, so in the US and in Europe. I want to give you a sense of scale because I want to, if you'll indulge me, it gets to why I'm an ally. We have 600 companies in our portfolio right now. We add about 200 new a year, and so we're going to be 800, 1,000 pretty soon. Thanks to our new, I see John Baldo over there, thanks to our new friends at family members at Up Global and Startup Weekend, we run 1,000 events in 134 countries around the world and touch about 100,000 entrepreneurs. So the reason why this matters is scale matters when you're talking about addressing and tackling this type of issue, especially around diversity. And a little bit about me, I've been in the Valley since 1999. I was born in San Francisco, so I've witnessed the changes, especially in this region. And I've worked at 4 startups. I've worked at Yahoo, I've worked at Google, and I've worked at Adobe. So I've worked at big and small. And I actually, about 2 years ago, came to the decision that I wanted to have an impact specifically around this issue, actually, around diversity, but also entitlement in founders and investors and bad behavior that's going on. Basically, the culture in technology that's been problematic. And I looked around and I thought, what can I do? I can work at Google. I can continue to do that. I can work at Yahoo, something like that. And I thought, that can work. A place like Google, with Google for Entrepreneurs and others are really invested, Intel as well. Some companies are really doing an incredible job, and they're having a huge impact on diversity in technology. They also are, they're doing a lot of the hard foundational work. But I thought, what better way to actually do something is instead of go top down, how about bottoms up? So if you look at culture's set in the first 5, 10 people of any company, period. It's done. And so if you want to have a big impact, then get diverse founders and teach people how to behave in this world when they're 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 10 people. And that will have a massive ripple effect in 5, 10 years. Because those companies, a lot of them will fail, but maybe they'll start other companies, maybe they'll go work at Amazon, maybe they'll go do whatever, but you'll build this network of thousands of people and you'll have leverage. And so I looked around and I thought, there are only like a few organizations I could go to. It was Y Combinator, 500, and Techstars. And there are others too, Google for Entrepreneurs and some others that are doing things. And everybody at the grassroots level is doing some incredible things, but I wanted to go in to an organization where I felt like I had broad reach if I could. And so it's been great, and we've been doing lots of things over the last 2 years that have got us sort of in the right place. And the reality is, like, if you're in the innovation game, which we all are in technology, like, diversity is sort of like, it's an absolute requirement, right? Like, you can't think about it any other way. And I want to have the biggest impact possible, and so that's why I'm here.
Awesome, thank you so much. And so let's go straight into some difficult questions, I guess. So, some folks feel it's not enough to appoint yourself the title of ally. You have to do work, per se. So I'd like to know what you guys are doing in your day-to-day to interrupt sexism and racism in this world, or in your workplace. Whoever wants to start.
I'll take a stab at it. Someone has to be first.
Yeah.
So I take this into 2 separate parts. One is I'm fortunate enough to be working at an organization whose charter is exactly this, where we're trying to figure out how do we bring more equity to the entire question. So it's great because it aligns with what I do on a professional basis on a day-to-day basis. The other part of it, though, if I took a more personal tack on this, it was, I think I mentioned in my bio on the website, one of the first blogs I ever wrote was actually on this topic. And for me, it came from a very different standpoint, where I was looking at it, my blog was titled, I Have a Daughter. And I was having this conversation with someone, and I realized that a lot of the things that we needed to do were influenced, for me as a parent, to make sure that she had the kind of opportunities that I'd want my son to have. And so when at that time I was managing a team over I was with SAP, and there were some very specific things I found myself doing on a very practical basis. I mean, when you're a manager, when you're a senior manager, you're in a position of influence, and you do have, a degree of leeway on being able to, on the kind of decisions that you make. And some very, very practical things, which, I mean, these weren't miracles, these weren't huge amounts of work, but I was just surprised that there wasn't more of it happening all around the Valley, or in other companies. One is, I mean, you take the topic of equal pay for equal work. I will admit, astounded when I actually looked at compensation across my whole team. And you don't need fancy spreadsheets to look at it and say, like, something is wrong here. I mean, there were actually, difference in compensation, which I guess had accrued over time to as much as, 30%. And these were across, two people doing exactly the same work at, equally high levels of competence, and there was this huge disparity. So what you try and do is try and fix that. When you look at other kinds of things in there, when I was talking to my team about the kind of hiring, to go back to the point that Don was making, you set the culture in a team fairly early on. And so one thing which was a consistent theme of mine was to tell people, you said, you're all here because you're really, really smart, and I want to make sure we're bringing the best people in. But you have to take those extra few steps to make sure you aren't hiring people who look just like you. Stretch the boundaries, bring other kinds of people in, because that will weave into the richness of the tapestry that you will build in building an organization. So those are just two things that I could mention, but I'm sure across the panel there's lots of other very, very practical topics or practical things that people have driven.
Josh? No pressure, right? I think it goes into more of an experiential question, in my opinion. I think that we're all the sum of our own experience, right? And so, so I'm a white guy sitting up here, and I'm in tech, and I've had some wins, but my experience as a human, I grew up extremely poor in a very affluent area of town. I got into a great school, but I couldn't afford to go, so I went where I could. As the first person in my family to go to college, I remember my first job out of college was still my most rewarding. I worked for an assisted living facility for adults with developmental disabilities, and there were a very wide range of functionality, and it was awesome. It was the most enriching experience that I think a 21-year-old could ever have, is to have to care for other adults in that regard, and it really kind of shaped my philosophy around business. So for me, when I think about what am I doing as an ally, it's based on my experience as a human, not as a professional up here talking about my story. I've always focused on one very core key aspect of people that I bring onto my team, and that's a very high level of emotional intelligence. I think that people with really high EQs can learn just about anything, including technology. Mm-hmm. And I think that I'm kind of a good example of that, because I'm not a technical guy, but I've been involved in 2 technical exits. So, and that certainly isn't because I'm a technical expert in any way. So when you sit here and say, like, what are you doing? What are you leading by example? I sit on the board of nonprofits in the city. I work with a domestic violence shelter in San Jose because it's something that was involved in my family, and I'm not ashamed to talk about it. I think you have to really think about what you're building based on your experience and what makes sense for the future that you want to create. I think that bringing the people in with shared experience is going to bring better synergy to your team. If there's something very difficult to figure out, then you'll figure it out. You'll have the people around you to do it. So I can sit here and talk about hiring practices and philosophies and all that, but really I think at the end of the day, it's what are you doing with your life globally, not just at work. Most of my clients are my good friends now, so even though I'm kind of in this hiatus after, SoftLayer going to IBM, I'm taking time off. Most of my friends that I see are old clients of mine, and it's great to see them grow their business, and it's great to see them grow their families, and it's been pretty awesome to see. So I think the question about how we're all allies is much different. I think you have to put action behind your words. I think if you say you're going to mentor, you do it in a very authentic way. I think if you invest, then you have to invest money, not just time. I think that there are a lot of equations on being that ally that you just have to kind of lead by your own example. What is the world that you would like to create around you, and do the best you can to live by those principles.
So I guess I would answer this question by saying I think a lot about implicit bias and the sort of the unconscious ways in which people express racism or sexism and so on. And to steal something from the thing you sent around before the talk that resonated with me that I agreed with was I think one of the best things you can do is just talk about these things. And I think that's actually something I really appreciate about the culture at 500 Startups. There's everyday discussions about racism and sexism and race and gender, not just, hey, that was a bad thing, but hey, this is a good thing, let's celebrate this difference. And I think it's especially the nature of these biases that we have, that if you don't think about them, they manifest. I think as you, on your team, have these conversations and you talk about these things, you look at numbers. I find numbers to be fairly compelling. When somebody says, hey, we're a meritocracy, and you go, well, here are the numbers, and we're 20% women, so are men 80% smarter, or are these numbers wrong? That's a good conversation to have people go, oh, right, that makes sense. Then they forget about it 3 days later, so you have to have that conversation again 3 days later. I think that's a specific actionable thing you can do in your organization, which I think makes people uncomfortable sometimes. But as it becomes part of the culture of your organization, it just becomes normal. And that's a good thing. So I think a lot about just talk about it.
Yeah, I would echo that and agree completely, especially on sort of the transparency side. I think one of the things I've been involved in a lot of organizations that are thinking about this. Techstars have been really great and open, and we've jumped in. We've been doing things since the last few years. We have a program called Rising Stars that feeds into our other programs. And but when I look at other organizations I've helped, the thing that bothers me the most is when people genuinely want to tackle this issue, they tend to throw up all sorts of barriers. And so helping them break through those barriers that are sort of like these excuses is kind of what I'm trying to do. So one is, you should just be transparent. Don't worry about it. Talk about it. Publish your data. Don't worry about the repercussions. Go do it. Everyone's doing it now. You should do it now. Please do it, right? I think there are other things, though, that really limit discussions. And I'm shocked by this. It's I don't know how many times I've heard the gender versus diversity question, right? Oh, we just want to focus on gender. It's what? That makes no sense to me, obviously, to any of you either, I'm sure. But this is something you have to work on at an organization, right? That's one. Or it's the right thing to do versus business reasons. Let's focus on why you're doing it, because it should be about, yes, it's the right thing to do, but it's business reasons. And this is why these outcomes matter. It gets to your data question about the outcomes of the startups you've been investing in. Obviously, we're about innovation, and so diversity is a key component. So it's fighting all of those things to get people to do things. And the biggest one, actually, is people. It's amazing how organizations get so scared they want to have a perfect plan before they go do anything, as opposed to just starting to do things and then figuring it out over time. And that's the one that you really have to break through, because they're worried about the first couple things they do. What will it look like externally or something? It's ridiculous. When we just need people to start incrementally doing things, and then it'll snowball. So.
That's great. And that's actually a really great segue to my next question about, we talked a lot about equity and decency of you guys as human beings, but not everyone is that decent. So what are we doing? What are you guys doing to engage members of your own community? And by community, I mean men or white males. What conversations are you having, and what are you doing to engage them to also potentially increase the number of allies that and make this world a more inclusive place?
So I'll hop in on that one. That's a good one. So I think a no tolerance policy is great. However, if you're not going to enforce it, then why have it? And so piggybacking on what some of the other panelists said, you have to create that environment in the workplace that it's a healthy and comfortable place to bring up challenging issues. We're all adults, we're professional, we're trying to get work done, and if something comes up, then there has to be that ability for anybody at any time to talk to anybody else about something that's very seriously affecting them, their work, their personal life, whatever it is. I can give an anecdotal story. I remember this is kind of 2009. I had just moved out here, and I had kind of heard some stuff at the startup that I was working at, and I was volunteering for this domestic violence provider down in San Jose, and somebody made a really unfortunate joke. And so I organized a team retreat to the shelter the next week for us to take the day off of work and go teach some of the women how to write a resume and how to log into their email and stuff like that, and got some really good feedback the next Monday afterwards about, seeing that in that situation and how, they were going to kind of curb their, male humor. I think you can do it, if you can do it in a really healthy and productive way to call somebody out on bad behavior, then everybody can win. But I think if you point fingers and don't have that healthy, table to sit at to have these conversations, it's just going to be a lose-lose for both individuals, the entire team, and your company.
You can go.
Sure. I think as an investor and running the accelerator, there's sort of different ways that we might interact with folks than you would in a company where I think it's a little bit simpler in a sense to just say, hey, we have a zero tolerance policy and here's what it is. To tell a brief story, I think we had a class in our accelerator where one of the founders I sent out an email and made some reference to head into the strip club. And before I could even respond to it, someone else in the accelerator batch wrote back and said, hey, this offended me. It became this, before we could even have a conversation about it, it became this giant thread amongst the whole group, which I actually see as a really constructive thing. And then, in this case, my role I felt like was we do a batch meeting once a week, and to bring these folks all in and have this conversation explicitly. And the person who had sent this email, really interesting, is he's a Hispanic American gentleman who grew up homeless, and he's like, hey man, I don't believe that I don't believe this is offensive. You guys just need to grow up. And in some ways that I think that was actually really constructive, because it's like, great, now we can have an honest discussion. He's not just going to apologize and we're going to move on. I think in that case, he was never going to change his opinion, but everybody in the room got to think a lot about it. And I think that actually, that moment was a great opportunity for these teams that were all 2, 3, 4 people to go, what do I want my company to be like? I don't want it to be like that guy. What do I want to be proactive about? And that's a conversation that I think isn't just on the checklist, and it probably should be. We're not having that with every single company. It's very hard to get everybody to really internalize those things, but I think I strive to do that with companies, to have those conversations. I think a lot of them now, which is really encouraging to me, are coming to me and saying, we're 4 white guys and we don't want to be like this forever. And it's like, oh wow, that was your first question for me, not how do I raise money? That's awesome. I really did think that when someone asked me that question. So I think that, again, it comes back to having those conversations and trying to find those points of leverage. And I think really in small organizations, it's early and it's being explicit and it's being uncomfortable, even if that makes you uncomfortable to have those conversations. So we try to do that, and I think you guys should too.
On our side, when we think a lot about how our employees are one thing, we all go through training, that type of thing, but what can we do in terms of providing curriculum to our companies? We have run 13-week-long programs. We're doing that, and we need to think about exactly what should be there that people can actually absorb, and who should be doing that. So we partner with NC WIT and Google for Entrepreneurs, all these folks, and get the best in there to have that impact, right? Because we're not going to do it necessarily ourselves. We don't know necessarily how to do it, but we partner with the community to have the best people come in and actually talk to those folks. Because again, as I was saying before, it's a ripple effect. These companies grow and grow and grow, and then that hopefully you don't have to You don't have to do anything beyond that if it just sort of organically grows. By the way, there was a, did you guys read the post that Stuart Butterfield, or actually Ann Toth, wrote for Slack this week? So they wrote a post about inclusion and diversity and why they're doing it, even at a 250-person company. It was really great. Everyone should read it. One of the things, was the best thing, though, and that's why I have my phone here, I want to read this, is he did a tweet storm sort of right after that. Where the hell is it? And he wrote, and this is the one that resonated with me the most, when you think about your organization, how you bring up people. He said, by far the best impact we could have would be a generation of ex-Slack people starting new companies, being role models, setting examples, right? So when we're building our organizations, we should think about that. We want people to leave. We want people to go out. We want those people to be the role models, and I just love that. On a personal note, I agree with you, Josh, on the sort of wanting to have a level set table and like basically not trying to call people out too much. But I actually think our industry could use a little bit more calling out. People don't. There are repercussions. The power imbalances are there, and people don't call people out, and that is one of the biggest problems we face in this industry. And of course, I'm going to do it right now. I'm not going to call someone out, but call them out at the same time. But back early in my career, I actually had the wonderful time back in the late 90s of talking to a CEO and taking 30 minutes of my last interaction with him and ripping into him about what a bigot he was and everything, because he was. And it was the most satisfying interaction of my life. Like, I've never had anything quite as overt in technologies, like seeing that as what I witnessed there. And
this was Yahoo? Or
no, I'm not going to say who it was. I'm not going to say who it was. I'm not going to say who it was. And it was amazing. Like, it was just so cathartic. It felt so great. And to this day, I can't even tell you who it was. One of the things I think is important is don't be afraid to burn bridges. Like, call people out, burn bridges. It's not going to hurt you, right? It's okay. And so we need to expose people when they are really bad actors.
That's right. I want to add that you guys talked a lot about having really difficult conversations in the workplace. Could you guys give examples of other things or conversations that you have that are difficult, or even some challenges you have having these conversations? I know a lot of us experience a lot of interesting things in media happening in different communities, whether it's some injustice to women at a workplace, or some injustice in our communities with minorities. And I don't know if you guys heard about somebody kind of joking about having like a Black Day, a day where she could basically take off because of the things that were going on in her community, just a day to just kind of unwind, because coming into work can be really difficult knowing that there's so many things going on in the world. So I'm wondering, do you guys have these conversations? And if you do, how do they take place? How do you start them? Are there any challenges with talking about what's going on?
I do all the time. I'll just get right to it. One of the most sadly, one of the most common conversations I have are, I meet a lot of startups. I was a community guy forever, so I was a mentor for both these gentlemen's organizations for a short time, and I run into a lot of women startup entrepreneurs that have great ideas, and I'd say probably twice a week I get a phone call from one of them that says, I met this investor at this event, and he said he'd be happy to sit down with me, and he's insisting we go out for a glass of wine, or with wiki faces on his email, and so it clearly blurs the line there. And so I get asked all the time by friends, by female entrepreneurs, like, how do I handle this situation? And as a white guy, I've never been in that situation. I'm not a woman. I haven't been there. So I'm super fortunate that over the years I've been around some extremely strong and very successful female executives who I consider mentors of mine, that are all 10, 20 years older than me, and they're the first people I call. And I say, look, I've got this really brilliant founder. I can't help her. Can you help me help her? Right. So I use resources in my community to try and attack those conversations. But that's actually one of the most common ones for my entire career. Like, I started off my career working for Clinton and Gore, and I was in Detroit, and if you don't know anything about Detroit politics, it's basically like the 1950s and 60s, where regardless of who was at the table, if there was a woman at the table, it was, hey, get me a cup of coffee. And it's like, really? Did he just say that? Like, and she was the one leading our entire team. It's like, what the fuck, right? So, so that's one common question that I get a lot. I don't know, you guys have a lot of female founders in your communities. I don't know how often you get that, but that's one that I have very frequently.
We get it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, and the problem is, unfortunately, I said, don't be afraid to burn bridges. There are repercussions sometimes. And so the question just is, like, how do you navigate through that? We have a very strong, we have like 7,000 founders, investors, and mentors. And that's where the zero tolerance policy comes in. So if one of our founders has a bad experience with an investor or a mentor or something, they're out, and that's it. I think part of it, for 500 and for us, is really making sure that the mentor network that we have and the investor network, they just get stronger and stronger and hopefully more and more diverse, so that we have those resources that people can call upon, as opposed to just calling our teams, because our teams are small. So we want the network to self-heal, sort of as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've never actually encountered that specific thing, or maybe I just haven't been told about it. The one I see is, just great female founders just taking longer to raise money. So with 2 given startups, the female founder will always have to talk to more people. And my general advice is to say, well, that's those investors losing out. Fuck them. Let's go find the people who will invest in you, and let's give them this opportunity, because there actually are a lot of good investors out there, both female and male investors who will invest in female founders. So I think at least at our stage, that's a good strategy to start with. Let's go look at the people who invest in your space and have actually invested in women, not just say that they think it's a good idea. And let's figure out how to work with them. So it still takes longer and it's still harder, but you can get it done, and you just hopefully avoid the hassle of talking to people who are known bad actors, and eventually those people will lose out and they will do worse.
If I had a different, I think it's great that I'll bring a very different perspective to it, which is about working within the construct of a very, very large organization. So there's the obvious benefits which come with it, and then the downsides which come with it. Going back to your point about, within a large organization, about having a zero tolerance policy. Now, having a policy is, of course, great, makes it easy, saying, okay, well, it's there on paper that you cannot act in ways X, Y, and Z. But the fact is, implicit bias then, in fact, becomes much more insidious and dangerous, because from a corporate standpoint, it becomes, well, we have a policy on paper, and in most cases, we're more concerned about compliance than about things being effective. Right? I mean, there's a mindset, to Don's point earlier, about as long as you have the appearance of doing everything in an equal manner, then it's fine. You don't necessarily have to do things in an equal manner. So the tough conversations out there really become having the conversation. I think in the construct of a large organization, there has to be very clear messaging all the way from the top downward, saying that this is not something we're paying lip service to. This is something that, that all the way from the leadership down expects everyone to step up and act in a certain way and behave in a certain way and incentivize and promote and manage in a certain way. And especially when you're when you're trying to build highly diverse teams in a very, very large organization, one of the biggest stumbling blocks becomes that when it comes to any conversations around discrimination, whether it's based on gender, whether it's based on ethnicity or race or anything else, it goes to what the panelists were mentioning earlier, that most people are very reluctant to have those conversations. Part of it is because of a sense of fear that, will I say something incredibly stupid, right? But the reality of it is unless you provide an environment where it is safe for people to have those conversations, to say, look, I don't have the cultural context, right? And if I'm asking, it's asking from a point of wanting to learn. Those conversations never happen. And if they don't happen, then the potential for things, for implicit bias to come in, they're just far more likely, because you never have that meeting of minds on topics. So you never get to understand that, yes, this might be something which is deeply bothersome to someone or is really impacting someone else, but you never get to internalize that message. So I think from that standpoint of really being able to create safe environments for people to have very frank, honest conversations is one of the most valuable things I've seen within, again, the construct of a large organization.
And part of that just is making a strategic priority that you're going to deal with these situations, whatever they are. It could be discrimination or diversity in general, and putting people in leadership that represent that, right? It's and being public about it.
And communicating that.
And communicating that, right? So that it feels like it's coming from the top down, and then allowing people to do what they need to do from the bottoms up as well.
Right, and that is not just lip service.
Right.
So the fact that you're saying one thing, but your actions demonstrate something else is the fastest way to lose credibility and make it acceptable for everyone else to say, well, I get it, hint, hint, wink, wink, and I see what's happening over here, so it is acceptable for me then to act in a certain way.
Right.
You guys talk a lot about environment as well, and the culture behind that. I'm sure many of you are aware that it's a very masculine world out here, and you guys have talked a little bit about kind of addressing these situations, but are you guys actively trying to change the culture around you? And do you even think that's possible? I know, Parker, you said earlier that the culture starts with smaller groups. So is it possible to change the culture at this point at like large corporations like Google, who've been based on, optimized for white males,
You don't think Google's changed a little bit? I mean, at least at the leadership level.
I tend to think of culture.
I mean, with the CFO, with Susan, with Marissa, they've done a pretty good job, at least in promoting women to leadership roles. They have other issues in engineering and so on, but they've actually been, I think, a shining example in that regard.
And so I guess I was more asking, based on your own corporations or places that you work, what are you guys as well doing to do some of the things that a lot of companies are now seeing the value in?
Yeah, I mean, the metaphor I always use is, your culture is like a boat, and you have a fixed size rudder, and the boat just keeps getting bigger. So it's much, much harder to turn the longer you wait to change the direction. So, I mean, I think you can make changes at Google. But I spent many years at a company called Pivotal Labs, and actually Google was a big client of ours. We tried very much to change our engineering culture, less with respect to diversity and more with respect to building code. And that's actually what drove us to start working with startups. We're like, we got to get them when they're young, because it's so hard to fix them once they've got that established culture. And I don't know, that's why I do little startups, because I'm sure there are people who are good at fixing big organizations and have the patience to do it. But you can, fix 100 small organizations or set them out in the right direction, I think, a lot easier than you can when you're big. So, think about that, have those conversations. When your friends are starting startups, go like, hey, what's your plan? How many white dudes are you going to be when you're 15 people? I hadn't really thought about that. So, you shouldn't give up hope, but I think it certainly is much easier when they're small.
I completely agree. I mean, I've said that before. Culture is baked in early. I would actually challenge Google. I mean, God, I'm a Google apologist right now. But Susan was one of the first employees, right? Susan was the first employee, and they did that on, obviously she's great, but they also did that on purpose to make sure that there was a culture set up early, very early in Google's tenure. And so they've had other issues, and it's a big organization and so on, but I think they've been better than most large organizations.
I mean, I think Google's a great example of how I think a lot of startups go. I think they didn't have a maternity leave policy until she had a baby.
They created one, right?
I guess we should have one of those. And that's good. That's better than doing nothing. But I think that's the default in startups.
No, I agree, and that's why we similarly view the world. There's one other comment I was going to make, and I can't remember right now. It's okay.
Well, this was really great. I hope you guys actually stay around, because I know people probably have lots of additional questions and burning things they'd like to ask you. And so we're going to wrap up for now. I hope you guys found this really great because I did. It's nice to have wonderful people who are fiercely coming up. This is a scary thing to do, you know, to be in front. I remember when I went to Grace Hopper and there was an all-male panel and the guys were saying to me, I said, imagine what we feel every day, you know? So this is great that you guys are up here. I hope you guys continue the great work and I hope you continue to engage your community as well as the rest of the community. So thank you so much.